When we speak about men and sex, we often reduce it to quantity. More sex, as if we're counting calories. But when a man says he needs more sex, what is he really saying? Is it simply about physical release? Or is it about feeling desired, feeling alive, feeling seen? Because for many men, sex is not just something they do, it's a language, often the only one they were ever taught. For connection, tenderness, vulnerability, affirmation. From the time they are boys, men are taught to be strong, stoic, invulnerable. They learn early that emotions are dangerous, that sadness and fear are weaknesses to be hidden. And so, sex becomes the one place where they can express longing without shame. It becomes the doorway through which they can receive affection without having to ask for it in words. When they say they want more sex, what they might really mean is, I want to feel close to you. I want to stop feeling so alone in my own body. But there's a paradox here. Because when desire becomes the only acceptable way for men to seek intimacy, it also becomes burdened with all the weight of their unmet emotional needs. And when women don't respond in kind, it's not simply rejection of the body. It can feel like a rejection of the self. That is why so many men describe sexual rejection not as disappointment, but as humiliation. What if we could start to understand male desire not as entitlement, but as a form of longing? Not as a demand, but as a bid for connection. What if instead of asking, why do men need more sex, we asked, what does sex represent for men who have been taught that touch, comfort, and emotional openness are dangerous terrain? In truth, many men don't just want more sex. They want more freedom within sex. They want to be playful, soft, expressive, not only performative. They want to feel desired, not just accepted. But the scripts they inherited rarely allow that. And so, more sex becomes shorthand for wanting to reclaim parts of themselves that were never permitted to exist. When men say they need more sex, they might not be asking for quantity. They might be asking for a place where they can drop their armor, where they can be met, not managed, desired, not tolerated, where their longing is not ridiculed but understood as deeply human. Because the truth is, behind more sex is often the quietest of pleas, see me, touch me, let me matter to you. When a man says he needs more sex, we are quick to categorize it, to assume it's about libido, about testosterone, about the glitches of male nature. We roll our eyes, we sigh, we diagnose. But what if we were to pause and listen differently? What if we asked what is being communicated beneath that statement? Because in the same way that hunger is not only about food, the desire for more sex is not always about the act itself. It's about meaning, about the layers of identity, validation, and closeness that sex can hold for men who have not been allowed to express those needs elsewhere. We live in a culture that grants men permission for physicality, but denies them access to emotional intimacy. They can chase, conquer, perform, achieve. But to reveal their fragility, their fear of rejection, their wish to be desired, that, they are told, is weakness. So many men grow up in an environment where sex is one of the few arenas where tenderness is socially permitted. They can be touched, they can be held, they can surrender for a moment without having to justify their feelings. But this creates a painful paradox. Because if sex becomes the only channel for emotional connection, then every dry spell, every rejection, every "not tonight" becomes loaded with existential meaning. It's not about being denied pleasure. It's about being denied affirmation, visibility, worth. So when a man says, "I need more sex," what he might really mean is, "I need to feel connected again. I need to feel chosen." It's not about counting the number of times. It's about the experience of being wanted. Desire, for men, is often one of the only forms of validation that feels immediate and visceral. And when that disappears, many feel themselves fading, becoming invisible. Yet, this longing is rarely spoken aloud in such terms, because vulnerability around sexuality is risky. For women, it's often about safety. For men, it's often about shame. Many men feel ashamed for wanting too much, for appearing needy, for being ruled by desire. They learn to hide their longing under humor, bravado, or resentment. Some become angry or withdraw. Others become silent and compliant, hoping that if they are patient, the affection will return. But silence is not intimacy, and patience alone rarely rekindles desire. There is something deeply human in the wish to be desired. It's not a male or female condition, it's a human one. But for men, it's a condition complicated by social expectations. They are expected to initiate, to pursue, to always be ready. Yet they are rarely pursued, rarely chosen in the same way. The experience of being desired, of someone actively wanting you, is profoundly nourishing and profoundly rare for many men. They may receive admiration for their success, for their strength, for their competence, but seldom for their sensuality or their emotional presence. In many heterosexual relationships, the woman's desire is the gatekeeper. And when desire fades, as it naturally does over time or under stress, men often interpret it as a personal failure. They ask themselves, "Am I not attractive anymore? Am I not enough? What did I do wrong?" But the fading of desire is rarely about one person. It's about the dynamics of the relationship, the accumulation of unspoken resentments, the weight of daily life. Still, for men, it hits a nerve that runs straight to the core of identity. We talk about sex as if it were a recreational activity. We forget that for many men, it's the primary language of connection. Not because they are shallow, but because that is the language they were taught. If we raise boys to believe that touch is dangerous unless it leads to sex, and that emotional openness is weakness, we should not be surprised when, as men, they confuse intimacy with intercourse. They crave closeness but don't have a vocabulary for it outside the sexual, and so they seek more sex. But what they really want is to feel safe enough to be soft. They want to feel that they can be both masculine and vulnerable, powerful and tender, without being ridiculed or dismissed. They want to stop performing and start connecting. They want their desire not to be treated as something primitive or selfish, but as something human, something that holds meaning. The difficulty is that many women experience the opposite dynamic. For them, desire often depends on feeling emotionally connected first. They need to feel safe, seen, appreciated before they can open sexually. Whereas for many men, sex is the bridge that creates that emotional connection. They need the physical closeness to access the emotional one. This creates a painful cycle of misalignment. She wants to feel close to desire sex, and he wants sex to feel close. Each waits for the other to make the first move, and both end up feeling rejected. This misunderstanding has broken countless relationships. Not because people don't love each other, but because they don't understand that they are operating with different maps of intimacy. When a woman says, "I need you to talk to me, to connect with me emotionally," and the man says, "I need more sex," they are often expressing the same need through different dialects. One speaks through words and feelings, the other through touch and physicality. The tragedy is that instead of translating, they often invalidate each other. We must also recognize that more sex is sometimes about restoration, about reclaiming a part of oneself that feels lost. For many men, sexual vitality is tied to a sense of identity, energy, creativity. When they feel sexually disconnected, it's not just about what happens in the bedroom, it bleeds into everything. They lose confidence, motivation, focus. They start questioning their worth. Because for them, sexuality is intertwined with aliveness. To feel desired is to feel that they still matter, that they still have presence and magnetism in the world. There is an ancient truth here. Throughout history, men have sought power and purpose partly through erotic energy. It's not just lust. It's vitality, the life force that fuels ambition, passion, movement. When that energy stagnates, when it is met with rejection or indifference, it can turn inward into shame or anger. Some men withdraw completely. Others seek validation elsewhere. Through work, through risk, through affairs. Not necessarily because they want to betray, but because they want to feel alive again. But if we look deeper, we might see that what they are seeking is not more sex, but more eroticism. Eroticism is not just about bodies. It's about imagination, curiosity, playfulness, mystery. It's about feeling desired and desiring in turn. It thrives in space, in tension, in the unknown. And yet, modern relationships are built on security, predictability, routine. We crave stability, but stability is the enemy of eroticism. We want comfort and excitement in the same place. But those two impulses rarely coexist easily. For men in long-term relationships, this tension becomes acute. They love their partners deeply, but the familiarity of domestic life dulls the spark of desire. The partner who once represented adventure now represents responsibility. The woman who once was mysterious is now known too well, and still the need for erotic vitality persists. So when a man says he needs more sex, it might not mean he is unsatisfied with his partner. It might mean he misses the feeling of being free, of being spontaneous, of being surprised, of being wanted. There is something deeply erotic about being wanted without having to ask. For many men, the idea of being pursued, of being the object of desire, is almost foreign. They are used to initiating, to carrying the burden of sexual energy in the relationship. When a partner takes that role for a moment, when she reaches out, when she looks at him with hunger rather than expectation, it can restore something vital. It can remind him that he is not just a provider or protector, but a man who still carries mystery, heat, allure. Yet this dynamic doesn't exist in isolation. Modern women are exhausted. They carry careers, emotional labor, childcare, household management. Their own erotic energy often lies buried under the weight of duty. For them, sex can begin to feel like one more task on an endless list. The pressure to keep up. Intimacy becomes another form of work. And so, when he reaches out, she might pull away. Not because she doesn't love him, but because she has nothing left to give. The tragedy is that he interprets that withdrawal as rejection, while she experiences his desire as another demand. We rarely pause to talk about how much unspoken resentment lives in the space between desire and duty. How many men feel punished for their longing? How many women feel blamed for their fatigue? In that silence, sexuality becomes transactional, mechanical, or absent. The joy disappears, and yet both partners are starving, one for touch, the other for rest. What would it mean for men to express their sexual needs without the shadow of shame or entitlement? What would it mean for them to say, "I miss feeling desired," or "I want to feel your excitement for me," instead of the simpler but less accurate, "I need more sex"? Because when men can speak the truth beneath the code, something shifts. The conversation stops being about frequency and starts being about connection. And what would it mean for women to be able to receive male desire without fear, without feeling pressured, objectified, or diminished by it? For them to see it not as a demand, but as a form of reaching out, a longing to bridge the space between two isolated bodies. This kind of intimacy requires courage. It requires men to look beneath their desire and name the emotions it hides: loneliness, fear, yearning. It requires women to look beyond the act itself and see the vulnerability in the request. Because more sex is rarely about the physical. It's a coded way of saying, "I want to feel close to you again." If we could teach boys that intimacy is more than performance, that touch does not have to lead to sex, that being desired is not their only form of validation, we might raise men who can love without hiding behind their desire. If we could teach girls that male sexuality is not always predatory, but often tender and uncertain, we might raise women who can meet that desire without fear. But we are not there yet. We are still fumbling through centuries of conditioning. Men raised to be strong but not sensitive. Women raised to be nurturing but not needy. We are still learning that desire does not belong to one gender more than the other. So when a man says he needs more sex, perhaps we can begin to listen differently. Perhaps we can hear not the stereotype, but the story of a man who wants to be wanted, the story of someone who equates touch with acceptance, whose body has become the messenger of needs he cannot speak, the story of someone who is not asking for conquest, but connection, not for more orgasms, but for more moments where he feels seen, chosen, alive. Because in the end, the hunger for sex is rarely just about bodies meeting. It's about what happens in that moment of meeting, when the masks fall, when time suspends, when we are reminded that to be human is to long, to reach, to want. And maybe men do need more of that. Maybe what they need is not more sex as an act, but more sex as a space where they are allowed to stop performing and start feeling. a space where they can finally exhale. When a man talks about wanting more sex, he is not always talking about lust. It's a sentence that often carries a quiet H, a coded message about absence. Absence of connection, absence of touch, absence of being seen. The statement sounds simple, but underneath it are layers of longing, confusion, and unspoken fear. Because for many men, sexuality is not just a need, it is the language of their emotional life. It is how they say, I love you, I miss you, I need you, I still exist. We live in a world that tells men to be strong, composed, and in control. They are trained from childhood to compete, to achieve, to solve problems, but not to express pain. They learn early that vulnerability is dangerous, that softness invites ridicule. They are allowed anger but not sadness, ambition but not tenderness, and so the only socially acceptable outlet for their deeper feelings often becomes sex. Through sex, they can touch, they can yield, they can surrender. All without losing the mask of masculinity. It is the one arena where they can experience intimacy without having to explain it. But this makes desire heavy. It becomes burdened with all the needs that have no other home. When a man says he wants more sex, he may be saying that he misses being touched in a way that isn't about performance. He may be saying he misses the spark that makes him feel alive. He may be saying that he misses being someone's choice, not someone's responsibility. So much of male identity has been tied to usefulness, to being the provider, the protector, the problem solver. But sex offers something different, the chance to be wanted for no reason other than his presence. When that disappears, when sex becomes infrequent or obligatory, many men begin to feel unseen. They start to question their worth, not only as lovers but as men. The truth is that male desire is deeply relational. It's not just about arousal or biology, it's about affirmation. To be desired is to be told, you matter. You are still attractive. You still have a pulse that someone else can feel. Without that reflection, a kind of quiet despair can take root. It doesn't show up as sadness. That would be too vulnerable. It often shows up as withdrawal, irritability, defensiveness. He may stop reaching out, or he may seek attention elsewhere. Not necessarily out of malice, but out of hunger. In many relationships, a man's request for more sex collides with a woman's exhaustion. Modern women are carrying the weight of everything: work, children, emotional management, invisible labor. They are stretched thin. And when desire fades, it's rarely because of disinterest in their partner. It's because they have no space left for themselves. The erotic part of them has been drowned in the noise of daily survival. When he asks for more, she hears pressure. When she says no, he hears rejection. Both are hurting, but neither can say what they truly mean. He wants to feel wanted. She wants to feel free of demand. They end up locked in a silent standoff where neither is wrong, but both are lonely. Sex, in this context, becomes a negotiation rather than an expression. It becomes something to schedule, to check off, to manage. The spontaneity dies, and with it, the playfulness that keeps desire alive. For men, this shift can feel devastating. The act that once made them feel alive now feels like a test. A test they often fail. But desire cannot thrive in duty. It requires a sense of mystery, anticipation, space. It lives in the tension between closeness and distance, between knowing and wanting. And in long-term relationships, that tension can disappear. Familiarity brings safety, but it also dulls erotic curiosity. The person who once excited you becomes the person who reminds you to pay the bills. Love and desire can coexist, but they speak different languages. Love wants to close the gap, desire needs it to stay open. For men, this contradiction can be hard to bear. They love their partners deeply, but the erotic spark that once defined their connection has dimmed. They miss the thrill of being pursued, the charge of uncertainty. They miss the feeling of being wanted. And yet, few feel they can say this without being accused of selfishness or immaturity. It's easier to say, "I need more sex," than to say, "I feel invisible." It's easier to complain about frequency than to admit, "I miss how you used to look at me." Underneath every sexual complaint is an emotional truth waiting to be spoken. But most men don't know how to speak it, and most women don't know how to hear it. When sex fades, it's rarely just about libido. It's about resentment, routine, fatigue, and unspoken disconnection. It's about two people who stopped touching each other with curiosity. It's about the accumulation of small injuries, forgotten compliments, unacknowledged efforts, silent disappointments. Over time, those little distances become walls. And yet, behind those walls, desire still flickers. It doesn't die easily. Even when men seem detached, there is often a part of them that is still longing to be met. The man who jokes crudely about sex might be hiding a deep yearning for affection. The man who stops asking might have given up on the hope of being wanted. The man who pursues relentlessly might be trying to outrun the terror of rejection. To understand male desire is to understand contradiction. Men are taught to be pursuers, but they also crave being pursued. They are taught to be strong, but they long for softness. They are told that sex is their domain, but what they often seek is connection. And because they are rarely allowed to name these truths, they act them out instead. Some chase variety. Some retreat into silence. Some numb themselves with work or screens. Each of these is a way of saying, "Something inside me is hungry, but I don't know how to feed it." There is a tenderness that lives underneath male desire that the world rarely sees. It's the tenderness of wanting to be held without having to be the strong one. It's the wish to be seen not for what they provide, but for who they are. It's the hope that someone will reach for them not out of obligation, but out of wanting. And this is where the conversation about more sex needs to go. Not toward negotiation, but toward understanding. Not toward counting, but toward curiosity. What is the meaning of sex for this man in this moment of his life? What is he longing for that he cannot name? Because sex is never just physical. It's a mirror that reflects everything we cannot say in words. For some men, more sex means relief, the chance to relax, to stop thinking, to escape the noise of the world. For others, it means affirmation, the proof that they still matter. For others still, it means connection, the bridge back to emotional closeness that feels lost. The act may be the same, but the meaning changes depending on the wound. And what about the women on the other side of this desire? Many carry their own longing, equally unspoken. They want to feel adored, not just needed. They want their bodies to be seen, not as something to fix, but as something to celebrate. They want to feel that sex is a place of play again, not a duty. But they are tired, and when desire collides with exhaustion, exhaustion wins. This is the landscape where so many couples lose their way. One reaches for connection through the body. The other retreats to protect the self. One feels rejected. The other feels pressured. Both are longing for the same thing: closeness. But they have forgotten how to find it together. What would happen if a man could say to his partner, "When you turn away, I feel invisible," instead of, "You never want sex anymore"? What if he could share the truth beneath the frustration? That what he misses is not the act, but the feeling of being desired. What if she could respond not with guilt, but with curiosity? Tell me what that means for you. When couples begin to talk in this way, sex stops being a battlefield and starts being a conversation. It becomes a place where both can rediscover themselves, not as performers, but as participants in an ongoing story of intimacy. Desire thrives on imagination. It needs mystery, risk, the possibility of discovery. But long-term relationships tend to erase those elements. We stop flirting, we stop playing, we stop seeing each other as lovers and start seeing each other as co-managers of life. For men, this transition can feel like a slow erasure of erotic identity. The person they once were, spontaneous, bold, playful, gets replaced by someone responsible and predictable. And yet, somewhere deep inside, the boy who wanted to be desired still waits. That boy doesn't disappear, he just hides. He hides behind jokes, behind schedules, behind silence. He hides behind the simple phrase, "I need more sex." But what he really wants is not more frequency. It's more aliveness. He wants to feel that spark of being chosen again, that electricity that says, "You matter." In truth, both partners carry their own unspoken needs. She may want more emotional attention, more help, more empathy. He may want more physical touch, more openness, more affirmation. The tragedy is that both are waiting for the other to go first. And so, the distance grows. When we begin to see sex not as a demand, but as a form of communication, everything changes. Sex becomes a barometer of the relationship, not just in terms of frequency, but in terms of connection. When desire fades, it's a signal that something beneath the surface is asking for attention. It's not an indictment, it's an invitation. For men, learning to understand and articulate that deeper message is a form of liberation. To say, "I need more sex," is easy. To say, "I miss feeling close to you," is brave. To say, "I want to feel desired," is honest. And honesty is where intimacy begins. The journey toward a richer sexual connection isn't about techniques or frequency, it's about presence. It's about learning to show up not as the person who performs, but as the person who feels. It's about men allowing themselves to be seen not as unshakable, but as human. When that happens, something shifts in the relationship. The pressure lifts. The act of sex becomes less about proving and more about sharing. Desire stops being a battleground and becomes a dialogue again. And in that dialogue, men can finally find what they were looking for all along: not more sex, but more connection, more affirmation, more life. So when we hear a man say he needs more sex, let's not reduce it to appetite or ego. Let's hear the heartbeat underneath it. It is often the sound of someone asking to be seen, to be touched without judgment, to be met beyond the surface. We must move past the old stories that define male desire as greedy or shallow and begin to recognize it as a deeply human longing for connection, expression, and affirmation. The truth is, men don't need more sex. They need more places where they can feel safe enough to be real, to be vulnerable, to be desired without shame. And we, as partners, as lovers, as a culture, need to learn to hold that longing with tenderness instead of suspicion. Because when we stop treating desire as a demand and start hearing it as a dialogue, intimacy stops being a transaction and becomes a bridge, one that carries us back to the raw, unguarded space where love and desire are not opposites, but parts of the same pulse. That is what men are really asking for, and not permission to take, but permission to feel. And when we can give each other that, when we can meet each other in that place of honest wanting, that's when sex becomes more than an act. It becomes the language of being truly alive together.